Hey everyone, Noah Zerby here. This is one in a series of short videos where we introduce several of the foundational concepts to the study of international relations. These are concepts that we'll come back to and make use of regularly throughout the course. In subsequent videos, we'll look at nations, sovereignty, anarchy, the collective goods problem, and the levels of analysis. But this first video looks at states, arguably the central actors of international relations. So let's get started. While international relations as a field can cover a wide variety of topics, the state is usually taken as the primary unit of analysis. That is to say, most questions of international relations begin with the assumption that the state is the most important actor in global politics. All other actors are usually defined in relation to the state. Indeed, the state is so central to IR as a field that we often take the state for granted, and international relation theories often struggle when exploring questions that are not state-focused. That said, we'll return to the role and importance of non-state actors later in the class, and we'll consider the historical evolution of the state, that is, where the state comes from and how it emerges and develops into its current form next week. But before we do that, let's start with a fairly simple question. How many states are there in the world today? The answer is actually far more complicated than we normally consider. The answer we hear most often is 193 because there are 193 member states of the United Nations. But the UN also recognizes the Holy See and Palestine as non-member participant states, so we could say 195. Collectively, United Nations member states recognize 201 states. This is because some countries like Taiwan or Abkhazia are recognized by some but not all UN member states, but themselves are not members of the United Nations. There are another 6 areas that have declared themselves to be countries but have no diplomatic recognition from other countries in the world. These include breakaway regions like the Republic of Somaliland, which declared its independence from Somalia in 1991, and other regions with similar status. There are 206 countries which are eligible to compete at the Olympics, and 211 compete for the FIFA World Cup. Now, the important question here is, why is there so much confusion about the answer to a relatively straightforward question? The answer we'll find is that it's because the criteria for statehood are political. Let's break that down a little more and think about what makes a state a state. That is, what are the defining features or characteristics of a state? The German sociologist Max Weber defined the state as a human community that successfully claims a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Now, you should immediately notice that Weber's definition has several elements. A state exists within a given area. That is, it's a territorial entity. It has boundaries and borders that demarcate a physical space. These borders may be, and indeed often are, contested. States fight wars over control of territories, but control over a territory is a central element or characteristic of statehood. Second, states have a government, and that government controls the territory through the legitimate use of force when necessary. Or in other words, to be a state, that territory must be controlled by a government that has ability to make a claim on the legitimate use of force. Often we think of this as closely connected to the idea of sovereignty, a concept to which we'll return shortly. Third, a state must also have a population, or people who live in that territory controlled by that government. Another way to think of this is that a state is a human community. Without people, you can have a territory, land, but you don't have a state. And finally, that government should be recognized by both the population and other states as having the right to rule over that territory. That government also has the capacity to enter into relations with other states. We often think of that capacity and right, as I said, as sovereignty, a concept to which we'll return shortly. Collectively, these are the 4 criteria for statehood accepted under international law as the defining features of statehood. Indeed, they were codified in international law under the 1933 Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. Article 1 of that convention specifically defines a state as a person of international law that possesses the following qualifications: a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. In practice, of course, things often look different. States may satisfy all criteria except for recognition by other states. There are lots of examples of this. Although South Korea is a member state in the United Nations, it's not recognized by North Korea, and the reverse is also true. Does this mean that neither is a state? What about Palestine, which is a UN observer state recognized by 137 other states, but not by Israel or the United States, among others? And for its part, nearly 40 other states refuse to recognize Israel, though it is a member of the United Nations. Does this mean that Israel or Palestine are not states? And what about Taiwan, which is not a member of the United Nations and is claimed by China as part of its territory, but is recognized by 17 other states? And what about Abkhazia, which broke away from Georgia in 1999? It is not a UN member and is recognized only by other states like Venezuela and Russia. The territory is still claimed by Georgia. Is Abkhazia a state? Clearly, recognition is important, but by itself is not definitive of statehood. So that concludes our introduction to states. Check out the other videos which look at other foundational topics, including nations, anarchy, collective goods, and levels of analysis. Thanks, everyone. Bye.